The rumors surrounding the Reds trade deadline are telling as the clock ticks on the plan that Nick Krall has laid out.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Reds. My name is Jeff Carr, and I am a lifelong Cincinnati Reds fan, and I'm glad that you're alongside me today. I have loved the Reds since birth. Seriously. Got the baby pictures to prove it, and I've been hosting this show for the better part of the last 6 seasons here on the Locked On Reds podcast, brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Here on Locked On Reds, we try to be positive about this team. It's the road less traveled in most cases, but I want to speak to every Reds fan out there and talk about the big thing that's on every Reds fan's mind. I'm so glad that you're alongside me here today. We'll get into some geeky stats. We'll look at the overreactions and the ebbs and flows of the MLB season, because that's what we do each and every day as we look at this Reds team, and quite frankly, they're the most interesting team to talk about in baseball because they're the most bipolar team to talk about in baseball. Because right now, they're a lot of fun. They've got a lot of fun young talent, and it's all part of this plan that Nick Krall has put together for this team. That doesn't necessarily mean that this is it, though. I've got some thoughts, some worries, I guess, about the plan for the Cincinnati Reds moving forward and the whole idea of the future. We're going to look at why the clock is ticking on Nick Krall and this plan, but I want to start first by looking at the rumors that are out there of the trade deadline that's only here in a few days now, and what that says about the Reds. That's all coming up on today's Locked On Reds podcast that is brought to you by SupplyHouse.com. SupplyHouse.com is the reliable way to get parts fast. Shop for your next plumbing, HVAC, or electrical job and get fast shipping from coast to coast. That's SupplyHouse.com. And there are a lot of rumors out there about the Cincinnati Reds, and quite frankly, they all point to the Reds not necessarily having decided what they are. There is rumors about teams interested in Jonathan India. Namely, the New York Yankees are interested in Jonathan India. That is the most prevalent current rumor at time of recording. It may have changed. We are moving into the stretch run of the trade deadline, so rumors are fast and furious at this point. But for right now, the fresh rumor on everybody's mind is the Yankees want Jonathan India. There's also another rumor out there that the Reds want to trade from their bullpen depth, which kind of makes them a seller. The Jonathan India thing, does that make them a seller? And then there's Nick Krall saying, we have not decided whether we are a buyer or a seller. And then there's also rumors that link the Reds to different outfielders out there. I saw that they were, there was talk that they did their due diligence on Kevin Kiermaier, center fielder for the Toronto Blue Jays, whenever the Blue Jays decided to DFA him. And that wasn't necessarily the biggest, sexiest move out there. But there's so many different things that you can look at and say, okay, what does this all mean? As Tuesday approaches, this Reds team is in the middle of a spot where they need to be adding for the future. They're not a buyer in the traditional sense. We've talked about this before. Most of the time when you're a buyer at the MLB trade deadline as a team, you're just looking for that piece to get you over the hump. The Arizona Diamondbacks did this late last night when they traded for A.J. Puck, left-hander relief pitcher from the Miami Marlins. They're like, okay, we need a lefty relief pitcher. We'll give up a couple of prospects for him. The Reds aren't going to go get a rental. I don't believe, and I don't necessarily think that there is anything they can do in Tampa Bay and anything that they can do in the Cubs series to change that. I think if they were looking for rentals, they would be close to the Brewers in the division race, not just the wild card race, but they would be close to the Brewers in the division race. but firmly within the wild card race. Right now, they're just hoping that they can cling to wild card life at this point. So that's where I think we get all of these different selling rumors. The Jonathan India rumor, quite frankly, I've gotten to the point, and I don't know if you're at this point, that it's like, hey, again, huh? An India rumor. Oh boy. Feels like we've heard about the Reds possibly trading Jonathan India 400 something times over the last couple of years. Like, it's the worst kept secret in the world that if somebody came calling with the right offer, I really think that they would make a deal. The problem is they've got the price so high, nobody's going to match it. And if the Yankees were really into this, they'd be starting the conversation with Jason Dominguez. And I don't think that the Yankees have any desire whatsoever to trade Dominguez. He is a top 10 prospect by most estimations, top 10 in all of baseball. He is their top bat in their organization. He is a good outfield guy. Like, this would be a stud. This would be the kind of dude who could anchor the Reds lineup for years. So should the Reds make that kind of a trade? I don't know what the answer is to that, and I don't think that the Yankees are into it. But if I'm Nick Krall, that's where I start. And then when it comes to the relief pitching side of things, trading away relief pitchers, that's probably just good business. We talk about this a lot, that relief pitching is a fickle thing. That, especially when it comes to relief pitchers on expiring contracts, if you can get back something for them, then that's probably good. I don't necessarily love the idea that the Reds are going to go out and add some project prospects that are 3 to 4 years away from the major leagues by trading away relief pitchers, but I also don't necessarily believe that that means that they've tanked the season. The Reds are not going to be sellers. As much as I said that the Reds are not going to be buyers in the traditional sense, they're not going to be sellers in the traditional sense either. The bulk of their team are controllable young players. These are guys that aren't going anywhere. Guys that it would make no sense to trade at this point. They're not losing them. They're not forced to sign some sort of long contract with them anytime soon. They're going to be here for a while. Elly De La Cruz, Matt McClain, whenever he gets back from injury, even Tyler Stevenson and Jonathan India. Those guys are going to be here for a while. There's no reason to move on from them. So for anybody that gets this weird feeling in the back of their neck, as I just scratched the back of my neck if you're watching on YouTube, then when it comes to the idea of the Reds being quote-unquote sellers, they're not going to be traditional sellers in that standpoint. They're probably going to trade away some relief pitchers, and that's probably going to be it. But they should still be looking for somebody to help them for years down the road. And that is why I look at all these rumors and I say, I think that it's pointing to the Reds not making a whole lot of noise here. We might see a few trades where the Reds send Lucas Sims somewhere and maybe they trade, I don't know, Justin Wilson somewhere. Maybe Nick Martinez goes somewhere. But none of these guys are going to be huge losses to this team, albeit the bullpen has been pretty solid for most of the year, so you're definitely going to be hurting that. And you're going to pretty much be making it a foregone conclusion that you're not trying to make the playoffs, albeit you're not tanking either. The Reds are firmly in this area where they're just mediocre at everything. And so with all these rumors, I think they're pointing to a rather mediocre trade deadline. But this trade deadline isn't the beginning for Nick Krall and you know, focusing on the plan and stuff like this, because the clock has been ticking on Nick Krall. I'll tell you why coming up next. This episode of Locked On Reds is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah, as the Reds are going through this stretch run, headed toward the playoffs, hopefully, that is, as they try to climb back into the wild card, you're probably going to want to follow along with them as they travel around to different cities. Maybe you want to go down to Tampa for this weekend's series. Booking.com is the best way to do that, because all you have to do is you go to their website, you search, Tropicana Field. It's going to bring up hotels nearest to the ballpark and make it easy on you. They've got so many different options with hotels, beds and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more that you can find your perfect stay with, all at Booking.com. And you can even find that in your rival cities like, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, Chicago, Milwaukee, all those different stuff. I use this for Atlanta, and it made things so smooth. The right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city. Made me a fan of Atlanta. It can make you even a fan of Reds' rival cities. Book today at Booking.com on the site, or use the Booking.com app today. And all throughout the rest of baseball season, FanDuel has amazing offers and promos for you to take advantage of each and every day. Plus, there are still some futures out there. They've got an updated win total for the Cincinnati Reds for the rest of the season. If you're like me and you took the over on a much higher win total, they've got the over-under at 77.5 right now. So all they have to do is win 78 games on the season and get you there. I still think they have a chance to be a 500 ball club, but regardless, you can check that out over at FanDuel. They've got same game parlay boosts, up to 50% in some cases, where you can put together the Elly parlay and get a 50% boost on that. And just in case you're not in the know on the Elly parlay, take Elly to get 1 or more steals, score 1 or more runs, and get 2 or more total bases. That's the Elly parlay, and you can check that all out over at FanDuel. They're America's #1 sports book for a reason, and you can add that big win to your summer bucket list all over at FanDuel. You've got to check out Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories in sports. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. And speaking of every day, shout out to our everydayers out there. Thank you for making us part of your day. Steve and I will actually be back. It's been a strange week where Steve's done a couple of shows without me. I've done a couple of shows without him. We will be back together today at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. That's Friday afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, live on the Locked On Reds YouTube channel with the audio and all that good stuff coming out after the show. But let's get back to this, because, I talked about the rumors and I talked about how it's making me look at this team and you can kind of read between the rumors as to what the Reds are going to do. But that doesn't mean that this is the beginning of we got to get things going, Nick. The clock's ticking here, pal, because the clock is ticking on Nick Krall. The clock began ticking whenever he called up Elly De La Cruz. Because let's face it, the talent that Elly De La Cruz has is unmatched. It's undeniable. We're seeing him take that step forward, and while he isn't yet elite, he's pretty close. We're talking like he's on the fringe here, getting ready to get on the green. He's got the kind of numbers that are MVP adjacent. He's probably not going to be talked about with the Shohei Ohtanis of the world and the Bryce Harpers of the world just yet, but he's right there. So how do you maximize that? Because, to be frank, and I don't want to make it seem as though I'm saying that I want the Reds to do this, but to be frank, there's a really good shot that the Reds don't sign him to some sort of contract extension once his rookie contract is done. Now, that is way down the road here. We're talking, whatever that is, 2020 or 2030, 2029, 2030 is when we're really worried about that. So calm down for just a moment. This isn't happening anytime soon. But that means that during this time period, the Reds have a shot to build an amazing team. the Reds have a shot to build a team that wins a playoff series. To say nothing of a World Series contender or whatever you have you on that, I just want to see the Reds win a playoff series at some point. You know, that'd be kind of fun, right? That'd be nice. That's what we all want from our favorite team. But Elly De La Cruz is the key. Because think about the Reds and what they've been in the last 30 years. They've had Ken Griffey Jr. Couldn't build a contender with him. They had Joey Votto. Couldn't build a contender with him. And it was not the fault of the player. It was the fault of the organization not being able to add around him. Baseball is more than just one guy. Baseball is more than 2 or 3 guys. You got to have a whole team. You don't have to have 26 men, but you have to probably have 12 to 13 really good men. And then 13 other guys that really fill in the spaces. But that being said, you have to have a lot of different pieces. And the Reds have never been able to put that together. Now, that's not Nick Krall's fault, but it is his challenge right now. How does he build this Reds team around Elly De La Cruz while Elly is controllable? And quite frankly, this past off season was his first real opportunity. He goes out and he gets pitching. But he doesn't really get a bona fide starting pitcher. He gets a guy that's coming off major shoulder surgery. And he gets a relief pitcher that wants to be a starting pitcher, but is probably better out of the pen. And then he gets a couple of relief pitchers to bolster that pen. So that's all well and good, but he missed a key deficiency in the outfield. All right? It's kind of weird going into opening day already conceding the fact that we didn't address a need. And then a bunch of injuries happen. We see a bunch of guys go down. Key players go down. And then we see some guys that are right behind the key players go down. And then it takes the 3rd and 4th guy on the depth chart going down before they finally make a desperation move for a guy like Austin Slater, who the San Francisco Giants were cutting anyway. The thing for me about what Nick Krall is looking at here is that the clock isn't just beginning to tick. It's already begun ticking. The Reds are only going to have Elly De La Cruz for so long. And what they do while they have him will go along. Let's say it's going to determine whether or not we actually see postseason success for this team. Because I find it hard to believe that they're going to go 5 years of having one of the elite talents in Major League Baseball that Elly De La Cruz will be. And they're going to just be like the Angels West. Right? We like to make fun of the Los Angeles Angels because they had Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani and nothing to show for it. A lot of nationally televised games, a few regular season moments, but no postseason success, certainly no championship conversations. Is that what the Reds are going to end up being? Because the clock is ticking right now on that. Nick Krall's got to address these needs. And whatever it is he's waiting for, I think he's got to stop waiting for it. His quote about eliminating peaks and valleys, he wants to make this team a sustainable team, an organization that competes year in and year out. Well, in order to do that, you got to have a starting point at some point where they actually compete. You can't compete year in and year out whenever you don't have that first year. You got to have that first year. When do you get over the hump? Because by the time this team is good, it might be Elly's last year. If we're just waiting on the players that the Reds have in their organization, if we're just waiting on the young players to develop, and we're waiting for them to become consistent, this is probably going to take too long. And quite frankly, that is why I've had some misgivings here recently about what the Reds are trying to do. I'll kind of dissect that a little bit more coming up next. Get supplies from the site that's made for the skilled trades, supplyhouse.com. Supplyhouse.com is the reliable way to order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Shop a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from over 400 top brands and get your order delivered right to your door with fast shipping from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Get expert support and industry-leading service from the friendliest folks in the business and talk to a real person every time. Pros in the skilled trades can get a competitive edge by joining supplyhouse.com's free Trademaster program. Every Trademaster gets access to a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free memberships at supplyhouse.com/TM and order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from anywhere with just a few clicks at supplyhouse.com. You can catch every pitch of the Reds' hometown broadcast with SiriusXM. Just download the SXM app and search the word Reds. You can listen to the Reds' hometown broadcast from anywhere. Also, make sure you bookmark si.com/MLB/Reds, otherwise known as CincinnatiRedsTalk.com, for written content about your Cincinnati Reds. We're got an article up there that I posted earlier this week, and it's one of those where I express impatience. One of those where I talk about how I'm not exactly 1,000% confident that the Reds' plan is going to work out, because we have heard so many different times that the Reds' plan is to draft and develop from within. And, you know, they'll get prospects with trades and they'll develop those guys and they'll build a sustainable organization from within. But it feels as though they're saying that in lieu of everything else. They're not going to worry about making big trades. They're not going to worry about making big additions in free agency. What little additions they make will be cost effective, will be short term, and they won't be kind of guys that make big splashes. That's where I have a little bit of trouble with this, because it feels as though they're ignoring parts of what it is to build a team. The Los Angeles Dodgers, sure, they have a ton of money and they use it as much as they possibly can, but they make big-time additions through trades and through signings of free agents, all while having a top farm system. So they do everything. The Yankees do everything. They build from within and they build from without, if that's how that goes. Even to a smaller extent, the Tampa Bay Rays, they make trades, they make signings, and they sign contract extensions from within. I'm not going to get into, whether or not they should have signed Wander Franco to a long-term contract. Obviously, that has not worked out. But the point is, they invested in their talent. Right now, the Reds have only signed one of their players to a long-term contract. Their big-time free agent acquisition this past season was Jeimer Candelario. And all due respect to him, he's been a fine player so far. He hasn't been that great, but he's been good in some instances. But he's not a big-time get. Like, there wasn't a lot of people around the league that were like, oh my goodness, the Reds got Candelario? Boy, look at them. Some of them were saying that because they already have 1 million infielders. Why they go get another infielder? But there wasn't anybody saying wow, we have changed our view of the Reds based on this move. The Reds don't do a lot of that. And I think that this whole when is Nick Krall going to make a move? When is he going to really start going all in and making, the necessary moves for this team? What's he waiting for? That question really worries me. Because if he's waiting for this team to be good before he makes a move, then that's going to be too late. Let's consider for a moment that the Reds went through a very, very bad and botched and failed rebuild after the 2014 season. So 2014, 2015, 2016. They did a lot of trades where they sent guys off. They got back prospects. Like, none of those prospects panned out whatsoever. They were bad trades to begin with. And then the guys that they had in system, they developed them, they brought them up to the major leagues, and they were inadequate. So what'd they do? They went and they panic bought, and they got Mike Moustakas, who was old and past his prime, and they got Nick Castellanos, who had a really, really good season for the Reds, but was not an elite player at the time. And they traded for Trevor Bauer, who had an extra year of control when they acquired him in the trade. And they signed Sonny Gray and all these different things. But they did that because it failed. Because their main plan of developing from within and building the organization from within didn't work. Think of how long it took them to do that. 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018. Basically lost years. They really started moving in 2019 and more so in 2020. And then nothing happened. How long do we have to wait for this next version of that spending spree? Do the Reds only get to spend once every 5 years? Once every 6 years? They had key deficiencies that weren't addressed or were sort of addressed. And quite frankly, I have to apologize because I was far too fervent in my praise of this offseason for the Reds. It's clear to me that I was too high on my grade. And I was a little bit too infatuated with what Nick Krall was doing. I think that he's got to make an impact trade for a player with multiple years of control now, and then he's got to be on the lookout for how he can make that type of move in the offseason. Because you're like, well, Jeff, they've got all this young talent, and they've got a core in place, and while I agree with you, my question to you is this: when are they going to, A, be consistent, and B, all be healthy at the same time? When is that going to come together? When are those two things going to come together? Because if we have to wait for that, it feels like we're waiting for the tippy top, for the 99th percentile outcome. We're not waiting for the most reasonable outcome. We're waiting for the perfect outcome to happen before we can say that this is a success. No team succeeds by doing that. The Atlanta Braves didn't look at Ronald Acuna and Spencer Strider getting hurt and saying, well, that's it. We're done. They went out and they made moves. Now, sure, they've had a lot of other injuries, and they're really hitting the bricks right now because of all of the injuries that they've accrued. And who knows what the rest of their season is going to look like. But they made moves. They signed guys. The Reds went out and got Austin Slater. And they made a bunch of minor league moves that for guys that, whatever, let's see if they got something left in the tank. That's not how you build a playoff team. That's not how you build a good team. That's not how the Dodgers do it. That's not how the Cardinals do it. Why is that what the Reds are doing? That's why I have misgivings about this right now. And look, I'm not done with them. I'm not kicking them to the curb and saying that this season is over. They certainly have time to turn it around. They certainly have a few days here where they can make some moves. And they've got an offseason coming up where they can really build. Like next year, I'm going to be disappointed if they don't make the playoffs this year. But if they don't make the playoffs next year, if they're not in the division conversation next year, if we're talking about a fourth place team in the National League Central that's just fighting and trying so hard to stay around 500 for the entire year, I think then we've got to ask some questions about who's running this team and should they still be. The clock is ticking. It's been ticking for a while. Reds got to get on it. Hopefully they can here in the next couple of days with the trade deadline looming. We're going to have you all covered throughout this trade deadline here on Locked On Reds. Any big rumors that come along, any big moves that come along, we're going to be here to analyze that and give you the big thought for each and every one of those, because we are Locked On Reds every single day.